Last night I was in Luzerne County, Pennsylvania, of course, listening to voters about the issues that matter to them. Anyway, the county, which had voted Democratic for decades, went big for Trump in 2016. For many of the people in that room, it was bread and butter issues that most concerned them, and they talked about feeling as though political leaders weren't listening to them. Let's watch. Do you think the politicians in both parties, especially D.C., New York maybe, look down on you?
Yes. I'm a Democrat. I'm a lifelong Democrat. My grandfather was a Democrat. They came in and sold us something in the Republican Party thinking that they were for us. Democrats, Mr. Perez, the candidates got to come here. They have to talk about workers' rights. Right to work is a huge issue in Pennsylvania.
Well, let's take that thought directly to one of the Democrats running to be the Democratic presidential nominee this time. I'm joined right now by former Texas Congressman and current 2020 presidential candidate Beto O'Rourke. Congressman, thank you for joining us. I don't know if that's news to you or that is news to you, but last night was great because it was real people in a neighborhood that hasn't gotten a lot of attention. Did you get the message?
Absolutely. And I got that message during the Senate campaign in Texas. We went to a place called Archer City. The last time a Senate candidate from either party had shown up was 1948 when Congressman LBJ did. Those places that are hard for Democrats to contend in or hard to get to geographically, we've literally written off. Only by showing up, listening to people, and incorporating their stories and concerns into our solutions do we have any hope of winning them. And then we've got to deliver immediately after that. That's what I'm doing in this campaign, going to those Obama-Trump counties, places in Iowa, in Ohio, listening to farmers and workers, being there with David Green in Lordstown, Ohio, after that GM plant has shut down, to be there and hear what that community is going through and make sure he's at the table in drawing up the solutions to make sure that jobs come back to that community. So we've got to show up first or nothing else is possible.
Well, that's true. You got to show up, but it's not just geography, because I was hearing from those people. It wasn't just that Hillary Clinton didn't campaign as much as Trump did in those parts of Pennsylvania, but they get the sense the Democratic Party, maybe both parties, are too snooty, that they're concerned with the issues of the sophisticates, with people with money. They're not focused enough on the issues that people that can't think about anything but they need a job and they need job security. That's all they can think about. That's what that guy had to say. I didn't show you the whole bite, but he said, okay, my social issue, he said, is providing for my family. So focus on that.
Yeah, I saw that. And I'm hearing the same thing across this country. We were just listening to school teachers in Iowa, many of whom are having to work a second or a third job or move out of state. And it's connected to what that gentleman told you in that town hall. They've lost the ability to organize, bargain, use their leverage to get better wages and working conditions. And you're seeing a teacher shortage in Iowa. You're seeing folks working 2 and 3 jobs just to make ends meet. Folks who have insurance unable to afford the copay or the premium or bridge the deductible. If we don't deliver on those bread and butter issues of being able to work a job and that one job be enough, be able to take time off to be with your family or afford the medication that keeps you alive so you're well enough to work that job, then we're not going to win. We've got to be there, talk about those issues, and then deliver on them. On affordability for health care, Medicare for America is our proposal to do that. A minimum wage that is a living wage, winning that fight for 15, paid family leave, and then elevating the power of unions. There's no way that you're going to prioritize the worker without prioritizing the unions first. And we've lost our way when we lost that ability to back those unions and make sure that there's a right to organize and use that leverage to get better conditions and better wages.
That's what the guy was talking about last night. Anyway, Congressman, take a look at this exchange, because you're down there on the border. You grew up down there. You represented down there in El Paso. Here's this guy taking a lick at the Democrats at our town hall meeting last night about the failure to have a tough anti-illegal immigration policy. Let's watch. Does anybody have confidence here that the Democrats will stop or slow down illegal immigration?
No.
Well, what do you think? That wasn't fully projected there. What the noise was. I went to both parties. I took a looks at there were looks against Trump, but then I asked, where are the Democrats? They don't have a wall alternative. What's the Democrat? People do not believe the Democrats are serious about stopping or slowing down illegal immigration. They just don't believe it. I can tell you.
I'm serious about it, and here's how we meet that challenge. You go to the places where people are leaving right now, the deadliest places on the planet. And instead of cutting off all funding for those Northern Triangle countries, you invest in violence reduction so no parent has to send their 3-year-old child on a 2,000-mile journey to be here. No wall, no $30 billion that Trump wants to spend, no cages for kids, no militarization of the border is going to stop that issue. Investing where the problem is and working with the partner countries in the region. And then if you're really serious about this, you rewrite our immigration laws so that people can lawfully come here to work jobs that we are creating that no one is filling. Folks can join their families. They can get in a line that doesn't stretch 20 or 25 years to come here. That's the way that we bring people out of the shadows, that we make our communities safer, that we get our laws in line with our values and the reality that we see on the ground. It will not happen through walls. It will not happen with any of Donald Trump's scare tactics and racism and his paranoia about people who come from other places. It's got to be a realistic program. And I'll tell you, living in El Paso, one half of the largest binational community with Ciudad Juarez, this city of immigrants is one of the safest cities in the United States of America, and it has been for 20 years running. There are solutions here that we can bring to the table to ensure that we address those very legitimate concerns that people have, but it's not going to be through walls.
Well, last night we asked our audience about something somewhat related. How they were personally affected by the opioid epidemic. Let's take a look at how they responded to that. How many people in this room know someone who's been affected by opiates? Look at this. This is the untalked about story. A lot of hands went up there. You can't see it, but Congressman, a lot of hands. Almost every room, I'd say 3/4 of the room had a hand in the air saying a family member, a close relative, or a neighbor has been hurt badly, perhaps killed by opioids.
You know, I talked to the Attorney General of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro, and he and other attorneys general across the country are going to make sure that Purdue Pharma and the pharmaceutical corporations who sold these opioids as miracle cures that were not addictive, though it turns out they knew something else, that there will be accountability and justice at the end of the day. It's the only way to ensure that we stop inflicting this problem going forward and ensure that there's real justice for what has happened. More than 70,000 overdose deaths, most of those opioid deaths, most of those began with a lawfully prescribed prescription. We got to go to the root of the problem. But I also talked to the governor of Pennsylvania, Tom Wolf, who's ensuring in that state that if you're prescribed an opioid, you're also prescribed automatically the opioid overdose drug so that you don't have the shame of having to go into a pharmacy, get a prescription later. There's a solution right there being developed in Pennsylvania. You see that in other parts of the country. That needs to be reflected at the federal level in the urgency with which the next president meets this crisis.
Do you think doctors are overprescribing? Because that's what that guy was talking about last night.
They are, and in some cases, criminally so. In these factories that have prescribed opioids for profit and gain without any regard for the welfare of those patients. But the origin of this goes back to those pharmaceutical corporations who use a massive marketing budget to sell this to folks. So this is not a criminal justice issue for the user. The vast majority of those who are hooked on opioids right now began with a lawful prescription. This is a public health issue, long-term treatment for those who need that care right now. No judgment safe places like you have in New Hampshire and Manchester, these safe stations where you can walk into any fire station and get the help that you need right now without being involved in the criminal justice system. But then there's got to be accountability on the other side for those who created the problem in the first place, or else you're just going to continue to have it going forward.
Another health issue is abortion rights. Of course, do you accept Roe v. Wade as settled law? That's it. Leave it the way it is.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. And as president, I would make sure that our Department of Justice always sided with women when there's ever a question about this. I would make sure that my nominees to all the courts, including the highest in the land, understand that this is settled law. And then I'd work with colleagues in Congress to make sure that we pass a law that prevents any future Supreme Court from overturning Roe versus Wade by enshrining that in settled law from Congress, signed by our administration. I think if you do that and then complement that by getting rid of the Hyde Amendment, getting rid of the gag rule, making sure that women can access health care in this country, not only will we ensure access to a safe, legal abortion, we'll also make sure that the wider issues, these attacks on women, are stopped and that we improve health care outcomes, especially in the midst of a maternal mortality crisis that is 3 times as deadly for women of color in this country. This is literally a life or death issue in the United States of America right now.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.